Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Today I've asked my friend Dorothy Samuels to explain the Supreme Court's impact on some of our most basic rights granted in the Constitution. She's long studied and written about legal and social policy, first as a member of the New York Times editorial board, and now as a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice. Hello.
Hello, Ronnie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Is the Trump administration, well, I shouldn't say it that way, is the court now looking to redefine, I guess I should say Trump also, redefine our civil liberties and civil rights?
Well, I think there's right now members of the court, I don't know if they would say they have an ambition to do that, but they are grabbing cases that are of importance to the country, and they are out to put their own stamp on it. And whether you think that's good or bad depends what you think about whether you have an expansive view of American rights or a more conservative view.
It's interesting. I never thought about the cases they decided to hear. So have you had disagreements with them on any of those?
No, but you always, at certain times in history, liberals were very glad when the Supreme Court took up the case. You were glad when they took up a civil rights injustice, and today you're nervous about it. And this is a court that has been actually under Chief Justice Roberts has been very aggressive about grabbing issues even that haven't really been raised in cases, such as in the original Citizens United case, where the court went much further than the four corners of the case in order to basically deconstruct controls such as they were on campaign financing.
Yeah. So what do you think are some of the most threatening things, decisions or cases?
Well, in terms of things that I'm watching and very worried about, I'm worried about the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. That's the one with the
wedding cake showdown, you called it, right?
Yeah, the wedding cake showdown. And it's about a baker who considers himself, he says, an artist, and he turned down a gay couple that came to his shop wanting him to bake their wedding cake. And even without hearing what they wanted on the cake or how they wanted, he just saw a gay couple and one of the partner's mothers and said, I don't do cakes for gay couples, and which was very deeply humiliating, and also was against the law in the state of Colorado, which has an anti-discrimination law that protects gay couples. Same-sex marriage, goes through the State Civil Rights Commission, goes through the courts in Colorado, and lands the Baker appeals to the Supreme Court. He is now represented by a very aggressively anti-gay group. I'm not questioning the sincere religious beliefs of the Baker, but it's now a cause of this this really adamantly anti-gay group, and one of the leaders not only against marriage but of rights of gays, and has had really sort of a nauseating track record in trying to spur more discrimination against gay people.
The representative, not being an attorney or lawyer, I mean, it's all sometimes a mystery. The representative of that group doesn't actually appear before the court.
Well, a lawyer for that group.
They do.
The Baker's not.
Wasn't the solicitor?
The Baker was, when it was argued, was not in the court serving cake. Let's put it that way. So they came up, basically, there is no, the argument that his religious rights were violated by by being told by the courts and the Civil Rights Commission in Colorado that he had to serve the gay couple. His argument is not that it violates his religious rights, because that's the Supreme Court has held before in the precedent that actually a precedent written by Justice Scalia is that if you have a neutral law of general applicability that was not intended or written to harm or target a religion or religious people, then you basically have to obey it. And the general rule of exceptions, when the court is actually very generous with exceptions, But the line is, and it's a really important line for our society and for democracy, which is your rights stop, and your right to an exception stop, when granting that right would significantly hurt non-believers, other people, people of other faiths. So basically the argument here was done mostly under a theory of the First Amendment, that somehow baking the wedding cake was basically, in baking the wedding cake, he was, quote, facilitating a sin, namely marriage between two men, that was against his religion. He'd bake them a cupcake. He would, come into my store anytime you want, but I just won't do this because it would facilitate. And if the court buys that argument, and it's clear there's at least 4 people on the court will buy that argument, chances are, you're going to very much undermine civil rights law generally, because allowing people to have
A religious.
to have a religious excuse to get out. We've litigated this issue before.
Yeah,
in the
we
civil
started
rights
this with
stage.
and it started with a hobby.
Right.
The hobby store.
Well,
thing,
in
sort
recent
of.
times,
Yeah.
we've gone down a path with the Hobby Lobby case, where you had a closely held family company, and they said, well, these, as an employer, we don't want to comply
Yeah.
with Obama's contraception mandate, because we believe a couple of those contraceptions on the list, they are really abortifacients, which scientifically not. But the court said, well, we can't second guess their religious beliefs. And they gave an exemption. But in that case, the interesting thing was, it's often overlooked, in that case at least, what Kennedy, the key vote in the middle, what he went along with it because, and what was emphasized is there's an exception here forever, already, that are for religious affiliated entities. And so it's not going to hurt the women there who are employees of these companies, because we can just grant them this easy, it's there anyway, so let's just include these companies, closely held companies. And now in Masterpiece Bakery, we're going down, further down the path, where it's asking for an exemption from civil rights law, only there is no accommodation available. In other words, people really will get hurt. So one of the ways that's being dealt with is to argue to minimize the hurt of having your rights violated.
Does the fact that he says that he's an artist,
well,
does that account?
That's one of the arguments. And everyone says he's a fabulous baker.
Right.
But
But does being an artist have anything to do with it? I mean, can an artist refuse to sell a product to anybody?
This is about the business conduct of people. Right. It's about how you treat your customers. It's not about any. It's not about any message.
Okay.
And the precedents are very clear about how that comes out. And so, again, they're trying again, with what they think would be a more favorable court. They've come up with a plaintiff who seems like a very nice, pious guy, but he discriminated in violation of the law. We don't really want the courts, and particularly these justices, to be in the middle of judging, well, which job is artistic? Which job is it? Who doesn't put their creativity? The issue is just, who do you sell to? And if you're going to sell to one group of protected people, you can't pick and choose your customers. That's all it's about. It's not about if you're quote, an artist. The Justice Department has gotten into the case, the Trump Justice Department, on the side of the baker, and that's
what I was going to ask you.
And they want basically a rule that some professions are more artistic than others, and say we could draw a line there, which you really can't, because you're just going to open the door.
So how much does the government's support weigh with the justices?
I think probably, with some more than others. It depends.
Yeah.
And it depends how ideologically I think it probably seems. And I think it's more the merits that way. But certainly when the Justice Department of the United States switches positions, right, from a Justice Department that's
Defending
supportive of the
of
contraception
the
mandate, supportive
same-sex
of
marriage.
contraception, or
Yeah.
supportive of same-sex marriage, that gets noticed.
This all points to what's so important when you elect a president is their view on that's going to be represented on not only on the Supreme Court but on the Court of Appeals, right?
Well, who appoints judges is extraordinarily
Yeah.
important, because important matters affecting the rights of everybody go before the courts, and the Supreme Court says what the law
the general
is.
public has no idea.
But for years, for over 3 decades, I wrote those editorials every 4 years for a presidential election, and so did other people, saying, God, the issue this year is the courts, because we're just, one vote away from this, or
Yeah.
one vote away from
And now-
doing something terrible. But I'm not sure. Some people vote that way, with that issue very high. But I think in general, I'm not sure that registers with a lot
Yeah,
of people as a
unfortunately.
key issue. But yeah, that's a huge power
And the other-
that the president has.
The other thing, as a layperson, you don't understand a lot of the intricacies of courts and all that kind of stuff. But with this thing that went viral the other day about the nominee for the federal court who wasn't able to even discuss what the issues or the practices, whatever you call it. I did learn that it's a difference between appointing the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, than it is a federal judge, because the federal judge presides over a trial.
Well, you could say
they don't
that
have-
some of the questions about
Do
trial
they have that
experience-
interpretive ability to
I think the
change?
general thrust of that question, which is was to say this guy is unqualified.
Right.
He doesn't know anything
Right,
about
but in
how
reality,
courts work.
in reality,
Well, I think it's useful to have some basic knowledge about how the courts
Oh,
work.
I'm not talking
to
about-
sit on the highest
Right,
court,
I don't-
because you're examining cases that often involve alleged mistakes in
but
how trials were conducted.
I didn't mean his qualifications. I just meant the importance of appointing a federal judge
Well,
doesn't present as much an opportunity to reinterpret the Constitution
Well,
as the
in
Court
theory,
of Appeals.
in theory, the lower courts are following
Yeah.
precedent, Supreme Court, as much as possible, in theory. But in certain courts, there are some bad decisions. Shouldn't always follow precedent. Being a good judge is really an art. At the Supreme Court level, you're deciding what the law is for the entire country, or interpreting a state law that will then, an interpretation that will be followed in future cases by other people. But any judgeship at all, and certainly any federal judge, it's a lifetime appointment. And except for bad conduct,
Yeah.
the Constitution is, you cannot be removed. And that's supposed to be a protection for all of us. And it generally is served very well, because when people don't like a decision, in very tough political times, competitive times, you don't want someone being tossed out for a
Yeah.
decision. The late Chief Justice Rehnquist was very big on, he wrote books about this, about the importance of having that protection, so that judges can rule without fearing for their jobs.
Yeah.
So
I just want to say that in Ireland, Northern Ireland, they are hearing the same kind of case with a cake person who won't sell to a gay couple, not to a gay couple, who won't sell with an announcement about supporting gay marriage. Anyway, it's
That's really
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is interesting.
Now, but the other thing that you're really concerned about today, not that you're not concerned about a lot of things other times, is the question of undocumented. Is it limited to undocumented?
Well, this is a fight about, this was a fight waged by the very far right, vehemently
About
very big
abortion.
anti-abortion, anti-contraception
This was
activists.
a couple coming up again.
In the court, it's coming up in new cases, because the first woman whose case caught the public eye, so-called Jane Doe, what we're talking about is folks who are unaccompanied minors, who are seeking citizenship or asylum in the United States, and staying in government-financed shelters. And this new head of that office, who knows nothing about refugee resettlement, he has stepped in to pursue his agenda, which is stop abortions at all cost. And that's what he did in that case in a way that violates countless precedents. And what I found so amazing is this case takes an amazing leap from, if you take Hobby Lobby that you were talking about, where a private business owner claimed a personal right not to cooperate or obey the contraception mandate, and when there was an accommodation so people wouldn't be hurt, in theory. Now we're talking about the government itself saying they have a right of conscience not to, quote, same language, facilitate an abortion. That's what they're claiming in the case. And that's the government itself claiming a power not to obey the law. That's extraordinary. And it's in addition, whatever we say about how bad that is for abortion rights and what it could signal about the future of reproductive rights in America, it's in general very scary for rights in general. It's a power grab. It's an abuse of power. The government says we have a conscience right not to obey the law. The government itself. That's a huge leap, pretty unprecedented. And let's see, as we have more cases coming up, that's going to be playing out in the next
But the
weeks
first
and
case
months.
didn't play out in the courts, did
Well,
it?
no,
Except
no.
for an order.
No, it did. It went through a district court, which held for the young woman because, frankly, should have been a very easy case given all the precedents around abortion rights and even immigration. And when you're held in government custody, for example, in a prison, we know that you're not without rights. You're not robbed of your constitutional rights. This was pretty clear under existing law. This is, as I said, this is going to be one of the matters that I think is going to be playing out in a sort of frightening atmosphere because we don't know even who's going to be at the court, how long this is going to play out. More and more cases are going to be coming up. But the Jane Doe case went through there and then went into an appellate bench where somebody who is on the short list, it is said, to be the next Supreme Court nominee of Donald Trump, he held against the woman. He said, let's hold her longer. Let's hold up this abortion more weeks as you're up against a 20-week deadline that the state of Texas has, and as the risks of abortion is a very safe procedure, but the medical risks go up exponentially every day that you wait at a certain point, and they didn't see the timing as any problem whatsoever, so she lost, and then the ACLU that was representing the young woman asked for an en banc, the entire bench in the federal circuit to hear the case, and they overwhelmingly found for the young woman, and she got an abortion. And then, in an act of super sore loserhood, the Solicitor General of the United States is getting all this criticism from people on the far right and the religious right. Why didn't you go to the Supreme Court, rush right away after that ruling to try and get a stay? And what he has done is try and shift the blame for that to the lawyers for the young woman by going to the Supreme Court on this very odd, unusual appeal, asking for them to be sanctioned. They informed them to the extent they needed to, but it would have violated their own clients' rights and their duty to their clients ethically if they were warning the Justice Department so they could go get a stay. They fulfilled their ethical duty to the courts, but they also, their main thing was to represent the young woman.
Did the state of Texas, were they the defendant on the first round?
I'm not sure, because this was
It
really...
would be a federal facility, so I don't think it would be,
No,
right?
I think it was the federal government.
Yeah.
There are so many levels to be upset about that episode and about the further episodes that are now landing, including at the Supreme Court. Because as we're sitting here, there's petitions in the Supreme Court to stop other young women in exactly the same position, or almost in the same
Right.
position, from
Right.
from having. And of course, what's even worse is many of the abortions of people in custody or come across the border, are rapes, or terrible situation. In the Jane Doe case, she alleged abuse at home. We don't know if this abortion was if this pregnancy was that she terminated was the result of that. In any case, it's been long settled law in America, although we now have a lot of justices who would like to change this there, and have said so, that there is a right to terminate your pregnancy. We are really entering, with the Trump administration, an era where the federal government is trying to reinstate a regime of forced childbirth. Think about it like that, forced childbirth. I think that's a pretty extreme road to go down, and it has a lot to do with this very, I think, relatively small sliver of extreme hard right religious forces that want to roll the clock back. And they're entitled to their views, but they're not entitled to, I think, to destroy the rights of other people.
But we are facing more and more of this kind of thing in this administration, right?
Well,
this
yes.
government is so intent on changing everything.
This
Excuse
horrid
me.
tax bill, so-called reform, that's coming through the Congress, even that has terrible language trying to fight out, again, the abortion right, trying to establish in some sort of writing that, that a fetus at the earliest level is a person, fetal personhood. That was a pet cause while he was in Congress and while he was Indiana's governor of our Vice President Pence. It's an idea, the personhood idea, which has been in actually the Republican Party platforms since Ronald Reagan. When it was on the ballot in Mississippi a few years ago, even for voters of Mississippi, it was way too radical.
Is it suggesting, though, that they have a deduction for a fetus?
Well, no, they do
As
it.
they would
They
have
declare it in the context of saying that you can contribute in advance of the actual birth to a college savings plan and take the deduction.
Oh,
but
I
that's
see.
already the law. That's already the law in the states that have college savings plans. So there's no need to do it. It's just another
Little everything,
vets,
right?
yeah.
And in the environmental regulations that they're so busy changing, are they being contested in the courts yet?
Yeah, they're all. This
What's
is
the
all in
time
the
limit?
courts.
I mean, how long does it take for people to challenge a regulation?
Some of them, I'm not, very well versed in the status of some of them, and sometimes you can go to court and you can get at the initial stage a district court injunction where they weigh the power of the case, who's the chances of success on the merits, do some
Yeah, I see.
balancing and all of the law. But these are the kind of issues that will, chances are, go all the way up. But meanwhile, the earth is burning up, and this administration doesn't seem too concerned about it. They don't seem to be too concerned about preserving public lands.
Yeah.
And so some of it, there were people before this whole tax thing happened, as you know, there were many people who said, isn't it amazing how successful the Democrats have been? And they have. I mean, Schumer has been a genius at keeping Democrats together on important issues. But he is established, without passing any major stuff, until the tax stuff passes, he has done enormous damage. When you take over these public lands and start allowing drilling and things like that, that's not stuff we get back.
It's very interesting when an administration that we accuse of not appointing enough people, they've appointed enough people to make the administration very effective in changing the rules that they don't like.
Well, just the judicial. If all Trump had done is as quickly as he is doing, fill judicial vacancies.
Yeah.
And we don't have a stop in Congress. We don't have, Democrats do not control the Senate. We don't have the votes. That's, for appointing young people who are very, very hard right, who don't care about environmental laws. A lot of them.
For life.
For life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end.
On that cheerful note.
It's been a very good course. Do you get credit for this?
I don't know. I'd love it. I'd love it. But it's really, you know, I think the message to everybody should be we need to be aware. It's depressing, a lot of this stuff. But we started the administration with a lot of people fighting and showing up. Mm-hmm. And it did some good at the congressional meetings. We all need to stand up. Mm-hmm. If you're concerned about rights, stand up.
Right. Thank you, Dorothy Samuels.
Thank you. And
that's a good way to end it. We at CUNY TV always like to hear from our viewers. So if you have any subjects you'd like to explore or people you'd like to hear, please let us know. Write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or go to our website, cuny.tv, and click on Contact Us. We look forward to hearing from you.